The biggest shake-up in education for a decade. Where's the car driving us? Let's talk about it.
Hello, welcome back to CraigNDave at the Chalkface. Well, unless you've been living under a rock recently, you will know that the CAR report dropped. So that is short for the Curriculum and Assessment Review. So the single biggest review of our entire curriculum and assessment strategy from age 5 to 18 in a decade. And of course, yes, the government dropped that, and aren't they wonderful? It was a 151-page report published at the same time as a 61-page DfE response. Go on, Dave, what are you going to say?
No, I think it was closer to about 181 pages. But
Okay,
anyway, it was a document,
lot.
right?
Yeah. So what did we do, being the nerds that we are? We make the statement that we review all these reports and read them and digest them and summarize them so you don't have to. So that was a fun commitment to stick by. But we spent 48 hours doing just that. We pored over it. We looked at it. We tried to, pull out the key bits and infer things that were sensible to infer. And yeah, well, we've put it out there and it's receiving obviously some thanks from people anyway. So we're going to spend a couple of videos just talking about that. So I'm going to share, we don't normally do this, but I'm going to share the PowerPoint because we're in danger of going off. As I said, it's a huge document and a detailed response. And because we have summarized it, we're going to go through it. But we'll throw our sort of own take on there and discuss what it means. But let's get straight in. And talk about what is this document. You're going to be able to download this document as well. We'll give you a link to where this will go. It will be in the video description. So we're going to host this on the site. So for the video description, you can just go there and you can download this for free. So the purpose of this document, if you should get it, is to summarize the key recommendations from the CAR, and that's including the government response. We've got a lens on computer science. Obviously, that's our passion. That's what we support in terms of resources. So we will specifically highlight the changes that will affect computing, assessment, and accountability measures. That's coming up in a later video. And, also it's just there to generally help support you as teachers understand what's coming in the reforms and help you prepare. And we've got timelines as well. So I'm going to hand over to Dave, and we're going to start off. If you're like too long, didn't watch all this video, stick around for the next 5 minutes because these are the key headline takeaways from that sort of 350 plus pages of documentation that came out. So Dave, what are the headline takeaways from the CAR and the DfE response?
Yeah, so the first thing is that GCSE computer science is going to be replaced by GCSE computing. Now, it looks like that's just a very subtle change in wording there, but it actually is quite a significant change. What they want to do is better reflect the breadth of the curriculum. So when we talk about the breadth of curriculum, we're really talking about computer science, IT, and digital literacy. And so this new GCSE in computing is going to cover the foundation of computer science plus developing digital skills. And that means the effective critical application and creation of technology. So I think what we can take away from that really is that at the moment, the GCSE in computer science is really about computer science, and applications don't really have a place. And digital literacy is a very, very small part of one of the topics. All that's going to get shaken up, and we're going to have a breadth in the curriculum and in the qualification. So that's number one. Number two.
Sorry, Dave. Go. Yeah, you do all of these. Yeah, look at that. Okay. You can tell it's unscripted still. Go on. I thought you were going to ping pong. Yeah, you do the whole slide. I'll rest, Dave. Go on.
Okay. So number two is the core principles of computer science, such as programming and algorithms, are going to remain in that GCSE. So you will still have a lot of recognizable components in there, a lot of recognizable topics. What's going to come out? We don't know yet. We only know about what's going to come in. Exploring and introducing a new level 3 qualification in data science and AI. We're not quite sure if that is a T level or an A level. All they've talked about is a level 3 qualification. But I think we can possibly assume it's going to be an A level in data science and AI, but there's no guarantee that this is ever going to come out. They're just going to explore it at this stage. This is big news. Academies are going to be required to teach the national curriculum. So at the moment, they are not required to deliver the national curriculum. And so that means the vast majority of schools can essentially make up their own curriculum. It's not quite as simple as that, because Ofsted, look for a breadth in the curriculum, and so they can't just do exactly what they want. But they certainly don't need to follow the programs of study. That's all going to change back to how it used to be many years ago, so that every school is going to be following the national curriculum, so every child gets the same education up and down the country. The non-examined assessment, what we call the NEAs, or if you're an old teacher like me, you might have called it work. That is only going to continue to exist in subjects where it really makes sense as the only valid form of assessing content. So an example of that might be in drama. It would make sense for them to be doing a drama, okay? In, food technology, it makes sense for them to be cooking. But for a lot of other subjects, it doesn't necessarily make sense for them to be doing an NEA as the only valid form of assessment. So if we think about the GCSE in computing, is it a requirement that they do an NEA? No, and we don't currently have an NEA, so that's not going to return. But it might have some implications when we look at A level and we think, do they really need to do an NEA at A level? Or perhaps we could assess that in a different way. And it'll be interesting to see how the landscape might shift there. We know there's a lot of debate, particularly with the exam boards at the moment, as to whether NEA is a valid form of assessment. And essentially, it could go in one of two ways, we think. It could either remain, but they will embrace AI as part of a development process in the same way that modern developers are using AI in order to speed up development and help with bug fixing and things like that. So maybe they'll embrace it, or maybe they'll go in completely the opposite direction and say, no, we're not going to have an NEA because there's too much room for it to be developed by AI. We don't know which way that's going to go. And then finally, there's going to be some clarity about what should be taught on essential digital literacy required for future life and work. So at the moment, we've got this phrase digital literacy. What does it really mean? It kind of means slightly different things to slightly different people, and we're going to hopefully get some clarity on what that actually means and looks like.
Yeah, brilliant. I mean, that last one, it's worth saying, that's not just clarity on digital literacy, it's clarity about what should be taught with a focus on essential digital literacy. One of the things they did pick out here was that the Key Stage 4 computing program of study has just 3 bullet points. And it was mentioned more than once. That is far, far, far too brief. So yes, they're going to be adding clarity and specificity throughout the program of study. But yeah, they have, as Dave said, deliberately highlighted that digital literacy will play a key part in that. So we've got some key takeaway dates. We do have a more detailed timeline of dates, including potentially when new GCSE and A-levels will come. This is all out of the government response at the end of the presentation. But I think 3 really important dates. This new program of study, which, as Dave said, will be statutory for all maintained schools, not just the LEA ones, if there's any of those left these days, Dave, at secondary. That will become compulsory for September 2028. In spring 27, they will publish it. That's Key Stage 1 to 4 program of study. So that will be statutory from September 28. They are proposing the new GCSEs will be first taught in 2029 and 2030. More on that later. There's a 2-year rollout in terms of where we are. We don't know where computer science will sit. And obviously exams will follow those 2 years later. And then first teaching of A-levels will follow 2 years after that. So there really is a progression here to the program of study coming out, to then the GCSEs, and then the A-levels. So key dates there. So we've got a more detailed timeline later on. So if you're already bored and think you've had enough, you can switch off there, but we hope you don't, because we're going to get to some of the more interesting stuff, because there was a lot to unpack in this car. So we're going to start with what I'm calling the curriculum shape, design, and importantly, assessment reform, because a lot of this affects the entire curriculum. And then obviously the knock-on effect of that is it affects our subject of computing. This next section after that will then get into the computing specific stuff. So on the left with this presentation, we have the summary that came out of that independent review. And on the right, we've matched that up with what was the official response from the DFE. And sometimes that's the more interesting bit, because that's the government's current standpoint, commitment as to what they will do out of the report. So what's interesting here is that first bullet point, maintain knowledge-rich approach. There was a lot of debate, wasn't there, Dave, as this was going about, whether we'd move to a skills-heavy curriculum or a knowledge-heavy curriculum. Is it all about applying an application? We don't need the knowledge. We'll just ask AI for the knowledge. It's all about how you apply it. But they have been clear that the foundation of any good national curriculum is a rich body of underlying knowledge. I don't want to spend 10 minutes talking about every bullet point and every slide, but I know you probably have something to say about that one, Dave.
Well, I think it was one of the things that was up in the air. There was a lot of strong voices calling for a more skills-based curriculum rather than a knowledge-based curriculum. So it was one of the things that we thought could change. But no, as Craig said, we're still having a knowledge-rich curriculum, which was one of the key principles of the last change back in 2014. So we're going to maintain that approach. So I think you can see this in terms of a bit of a pyramid. You've got the knowledge at the bottom, which underpins the understanding. And on top of that, there is wisdom. So having a knowledge-rich curriculum, just knowing stuff is how I would describe it. Knowing stuff without having to go and ask AI is still important.
Brilliant. So they've also made it quite clear they're going to strengthen horizontal links, and we'll talk about that. And whereas we've always talked about literacy and numeracy, they specifically mention how digital literacy now has to spread across all subjects. So we will get into that, and where's our role in that as computer science teachers. And, this idea of broadening perspective while maintaining disciplinary depths. That fourth bullet point, I think we're very keen on here at CraigNDave, and it backs up their first point, that the mastery of these core concepts and making sure that we retain this knowledge to support long-term learning is essential. The last point made Dave and I laugh. We try not to be too controversial. Ensure that high standards and opportunity means high standards for all. Well, that's good, because until then, schools were sat there going, well, we don't need to have high standards for all. We all strive to have high standards for all, but they've underlined that we absolutely must do that now. So thank you for that one. And you can't have all this stuff on the back, or all the stuff on the left saying, have a rich body of knowledge, horizontal links, core concepts, without having the government commitment on the right, that therefore we will make this mandatory. So that's pretty much the government response. They have said at the second paragraph there, this will be made clear to parents and carers, this program of study, so they know there's a floor beneath which, education can't slip. This is the minimum basis. It is statutory. We will publish it, and it will be mandated. So they're the overall curriculum design principles. We then get into assessment reform. Another big one. There was a lot, wasn't there, Dave? A lot of voices. Exams were an old way to assess. We should move to portfolios of evidence. I think you even heard a talk, someone suggesting we have some kind of badge scout scheme where we earn, different badges. And nope, all that's out. They have basically said externally marked exams remain the fairest, most reliable method. And the big reason for that is generative AI. They have rejected the requests to expand coursework or move to a heavier portfolio-based type of assessment because of the risks of generative AI. So they've been really clear, and then I won't read it word for word. The official response basically backs that up. NEA, as we've said, only to be used where it's absolutely necessary. They have acknowledged we are disproportionately burdened in terms of the number of hours are Key Stage 4 students sit an exam. So they are committing to reducing the total volume of exams they take across all subjects, but not by an awful lot, by about 10%. And also, I think to limit GCSE papers to sort of 2 exams per subject. So that's the main assessment bits. Any little tidbits in there, Dave, you want to sort of throw in?
Yeah, so it doesn't really affect us hugely. I mean, the reason that they're keeping exams is, as Craig says, because of the AI element, but also they're nervous of the disadvantaged gap. I think everybody knows that
Yeah.
if you give students something that's skills based, something that they can work on outside of lessons, then it very much favors those students that have opportunities to be able to do that. So they want to make it as fair as possible. We're surprised in a bit, in a sense, that exams are such a high focus. I think that we were anticipating perhaps it could go back to a sort of 60-40 split or something like that we used to have many years ago. But no, it looks like it's going to be 100% for most subjects. And then who knows what it's going to be in some of those subjects where clearly it does need to be more skills based. But limiting to 2 exam papers doesn't affect us in computing because we've got 2 exam papers now. But I'm thinking about subjects like maths where they have 3 and they're going to have to cut down to 2. And then the overall reduction of 10% on the number on the time in exams, it looks like that's probably not going to affect us. We'll have 2 exams, probably the same length they are now. Not much changes.
Perfect. One other slide specifically on digital assessment. So we're a bit more aware there's computer science because we know exam boards are working on it, and there is some online component to some of the exam boards like edXL, AQA, but they are encouraging the DfE and Ofqual to be innovative with digital assessment. There's not a lot more there. What they're saying is where this will really help is for accessibility of SEND students. So, they're highlighting here that digital assessment could be a real benefit. They have acknowledged there needs to be a balance between innovation and reliability. Now, every subject, every exam is computers. Well, that's great. I'm in a school. How the hell does that work? We shove people in the sports hall, the main hall. So, and the government have just responded to say, look, we will work carefully with that. We'll look at that and we will introduce digital assessment in an appropriate, safe and sensible way. So,
Yeah.
Go on, Dave, sorry.
And we do know that both OCR and AQA are actively pursuing digital assessment, and they're working on platforms, and there have been trials, and that's going to continue. The problems that they're facing, because you might think, well, why hasn't this been released already? The problems they're facing are with equity. So if you've got, for example, with OCR, a J277 that students complete in an example with a pen and a paper, and then you've say got a J278 specification that is entirely online, where students can do things like drag and drop and draw star networks online and all that kind of thing. It's not equitable because it takes longer to answer some questions than others. It takes a slightly different skill set to be able to sort of drag and drop rather than draw a line between 2 boxes. And so they've got to make sure that the 2 qualifications are exactly equitable. And so if they change the style of the question or they change the question itself, then you end up in an awkward situation with grade boundaries shifting and things like that. So they're dealing with technical issues with the platform, and they are dealing with fair access problems with the actual nature of the qualifications, but they're definitely coming down the line. Now, in terms of Pearson, so Pearson are in a slightly different situation because they have an online paper 2 where the students answer programming questions in an IDE on the computer. Well, that will remain because it's not affected by any of this. So I can't see that changing hugely. It works as it does now.
Right, so on to curriculum shape and subject choice. We won't labour this one too much, but it was interesting. They have quite clearly one of Go's flagship performance measures, EBAC. It became a performance measure alongside Progress 8 and Attainment 8. Well, that's going. What they're saying is it became too restrictive and specific. especially so if you were a religious designated school that would often mandate a GCSE and RS. It further narrowed the options. And they actually pulled out that this core subjects like computing, arts and vocational subjects to be excluded. Ironic, as obviously computing was being thrown in as the fourth science and something important, but they've basically said it narrows it too much. So the EBAC as a performance measure is being scrapped. I think that's the real key takeaway there. They want to keep the EBAC in, but they're going to call it academic breadth now. And they are making some very interesting. It looks subtle on the face of it, like nothing lot's changed, but it does allow for a very interesting choice of subjects at options now. They are changing how the Progress 8 and Attainment 8 buckets or the makeup of those, they're changing how that's working. And we're going to do a totally separate video on that because that has some really interesting implications as to what subjects you can offer your students, the combinations they can take, and which will count. So EBAC out, Progress 8 and Attainment 8 remain, but the structure of those performance measures and what combination of subjects you can take are being changed. So we'll get into that in a second video. Anything you want to add on that one, Dave?
Well, this is the one that's causing the most political unrest. Okay,
Yeah.
so the Conservatives are completely up in arms because, they really believed in the EBAC. They believed that it was right that students had an opportunity to study, the academic subjects, if you like. And they're a little bit worried that it might kind of go back to just being, a few of the academic students that end up following academic pathways, and they didn't really want that to happen. It probably doesn't affect us hugely, to be honest. As Craig says, we'll have a look at where computing is in the buckets and things like that in a future episode. But for now, probably we're not going to notice a huge difference.
Yeah, there was we'll get into it in that episode. There was an interesting option they're considering, which could make the computing GCSE either more popular as a choice for schools to offer or less popular. And it's very subtle, but it could have big implications. But we'll get into that in another video.
Probably more likely to affect the modern languages and the humanities. I think they're probably looking at this thinking, ooh, what does this mean?
Absolutely. And finally, we can't finish this kind of curriculum balance without talking about Key Stage 5. Two key takeaways. They've said the post Key Stage 4 landscape is confusing. Hello? I could have told you that for years. Yeah, the range of level 3 qualifications and what is and what isn't. They've just said it's confusing. They're saying employers don't understand it. They're saying students and parents don't understand it. And therefore, students are picking choices to Key Stage 5, which are limiting the directions or where they want to go. It's just too confusing. They've also said that T levels need longer to embed, but that A levels and T levels are missing something. They're still both quite academically focused. Although T levels are obviously within a discipline, it's still too academic. They're saying what's missed here, and what they've proposed is a third level 3 qualification they're calling V levels. And they're proposing that will be the breadth. We'll streamline it. You'll have A levels academic, T levels technical, V levels vocational, and they'll all be roughly the same size, 360 guided learning hours. So you can mix and match these equivalencies. So it's a big lofty aim, because I don't know about you, Dave. I don't know how long I've been in teaching. There's a new level 3 qualification. Or are we doing BTECs? Now we're doing these. Now we're doing those. It's still very early days on this, isn't it? But you're shaking your head.
They just never seem to nail it. I mean, I think you're right. We've been talking about this for 20 years. And every sort of 5 years or so, you get a new initiative around the vocational qualification space. And, we all think it's going to change in this way. And they keep talking about the scrapping of BTECs. And the moment they go to scrap BTECs, oh, no, don't scrap BTECs. And so we've been in this situation time and time again. So you'll forgive me for thinking a little bit more pessimistic and skeptical here about whether they can actually achieve this. I really like the idea. I'm going to be honest. Yeah. The simplicity of you have got an academic A level that is your route to university. And by the way, they've dropped this pledge now that sort of half of all students should go to university. So that eases things up a little bit there. And then you've got the T levels for students that are going to do subjects that could be a little bit less academic and more technical based and go into those sort of technical careers. That makes perfect sense. And of course, computing sort of ends up straddling between the two a little bit, doesn't it? But that's okay, because you could take the academic, pure computer science route into university, or maybe you do T levels, which takes you off towards more sort of software engineering, maybe. I don't know.
That could be where maybe the data sciences and AI one sits.
Data sciences and AI, that kind of makes perfect sense, doesn't it? And then you've got this third level, which is really, you know, the vocational, the hands-on, no less important. And I think that's the critical thing, isn't it? No less important than the academic route or the technical route, but it takes you directly into a career, and that sort of makes perfect sense. If they pull this off and they keep it nice and simple, you've got A, T, and V,
and they get rid of everything else. Yeah, get rid of everything else.
But they need to scrap everything else. And I think my fear is that, you know, the bodies that are behind those other qualifications that have been around for decades, and some of them are quite well known, they really don't want to get rid of them. And so if they do allow some to keep a qualification in the vocational space, it will all fall apart, and you'll never get there. So we'll see what happens.
Right. So quite a lot there. I mean, we've covered curriculum design, intent, assessment, key stage 5. There's a lot to digest. And although at the start we did say we were going to go through, we've realized we've been chatting away for half an hour already. So what we're going to do is going to wrap that video up there. Part 2, we will return to this and we'll look specifically now at what the CAR said and the DfE response with a lens on computing. So that's it for part 1. Thank you very much for watching. Come back for part 2, where we dive in a bit more detail at computing and what it means for us.